Welcome to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's begin. Cursed land. There was a time when, in the dark corners of New England, where vast forests devoured everything in their path, people believed in the power of dark forces. Fear and superstition intertwined with reality, and invisible powers governed the lives of the inhabitants of those lands. And in the heart of this time, when the earth was still full of mysterious legends and darkness, events occurred that forever changed the fate of this region. In 1692, when the Puritans still ruled Salem, a small village called Lightwood, located in the far west of Massachusetts, became a hub of terror. Here, amidst clouds and rain that covered the sky, the village seemed quiet and peaceful. However, the seemingly ordinary land hid many dark secrets. The people of Lightwood, like most Puritan settlers, feared the unclean forces. In their hearts, there was no room for doubt that each one of them could become the victim of a curse if they looked beyond the boundaries of accepted rules. And of course, they were most afraid of witches. This village was one of those few where people lived in fear even of one another. And it so happened that one woman, named Ellen Morgan, brought true horror to Lightwood. Ellen was a widow who settled in the village after her husband, Benjamin, was killed during a hunt for wild animals. She was known in the village for her strange behavior, and her gaze always seemed too deep and mysterious for that time. Not everyone trusted her. Rumors spread that she possessed secret knowledge that did not belong to this world. However, no one could predict that one day she would become the central figure in a true tragedy. One evening, when darkness descended on the village, a little girl, Margaret, ran through the streets of Lightwood, shouting that she had seen Ellen place a black book on the ground, glowing with a strange light. Margaret did not know exactly what she had seen, but her words quickly spread throughout the village. This was the moment when fear took hold of the hearts of the people. The people of Lightwood, overwhelmed by superstition and bad weather, decided to take action. They turned to their old priest, Father Jonathan, who, like many of his time, was convinced that there was a place on earth not only for good spirits. And so began the event that would become the greatest nightmare for the village of Lightwood. The morning after Margaret ran with her story, all eyes in the village were on Ellen Morgan. Rumors quickly turned into accusations, and each new whisper drove the people further into fear. They feared what they could not see, and what was invisible became even more terrifying than what actually existed. Soon, under the pressure of panic, the people of Lightwood gathered for a meeting, during which it was decided that action must be taken. Father Jonathan directed them to unravel this mystical occurrence, expressing the belief that such an event was nothing but a demonic influence that had intruded into their village. He declared that anyone who was suspected should be subjected to trials through prayer and rituals of exorcism. However, this time, he not only acted as their spiritual leader but also as the chief investigator in this case. And the first suspect had already been found. Ellen Morgan did not hide her hostility toward the noise around her. She refused to explain what had actually happened that night with the book, but her silence only fueled the fear in the hearts of the local residents. Everyone forgot that she was a widow who had lost her husband under unknown circumstances. Now she had become a symbol of dark evil, and the rumors grew like an avalanche. One evening, when it was dark again, several men from the village came to her house. They tried to persuade her to reveal the secrets of what had happened, but Ellen only coldly replied that she was not guilty and had nothing to explain. And so, they decided that she must be arrested. But there was no time for regular trials. At a time when religious beliefs intertwined with superstitions, the verdict was simplified to what occurred on the streets during public trials. Unaware of what was happening, they seized her and brought her to the town hall to conduct an interrogation ritual. According to the beliefs of the time, if a woman was a witch, she would undoubtedly confess under the influence of prayer and other trials. She was accused of summoning demons, controlling dark forces, and even stealing the soul of her deceased husband. They also believed that the book she was supposedly seen holding was a magical guide for witchcraft. Of course, Ellen did not give in. There was a cold determination in her eyes, and on her lips, only a shadow of a smile, which, in the priest's view, was confirmation of her guilt. The next morning, she was led to the place of execution, located near the forest, where, according to local beliefs, witches often performed their dark rituals. 3 large posts were already standing, waiting for their victim. They were cut with sharp blades designed to absorb the final scream of the condemned. A bonfire burned nearby, and the first tongues of flame rose into the sky. Ellen was accused not only of witchcraft but also of causing local residents to suffer from mysterious diseases. Like in bad fairy tales, their children died from fever, and their livestock perished without explanation. Every day, more and more people fell into panic and blamed Ellen for all the misfortunes. As they tied her to one of the posts, another priest arrived in the village to perform the final ritual before the burning. His voice rang out through the wind as he proclaimed a curse that would supposedly cleanse the land of evil. "God will cleanse this land of impurity," the priest shouted as the fire raged beneath the feet of the unfortunate woman. And then, when the fire engulfed her body in its embrace, something happened that left the village in shock. After her death, incredible phenomena began to occur in Lightwood. The trees turned black and lowered their branches, and the fogs grew thicker than ever. A light breeze carried strange whispers to the ears of the people, and each of them could hear Ellen's voice ringing in their minds for many years. It was not just a death. It was a curse placed on Lightwood by the darkest of forces, and this was only the beginning. After Ellen Morgan's death, Lightwood was no longer the same place. The locals, although they tried to continue with their lives, still felt that something terrible had happened to them. From time to time, they noticed unknown shadows moving in the forest, and around Ellen's house, a strange black shrub began to grow, which would cover itself with tongues of flame overnight, even if no one lit a fire. But it wasn't just this that troubled the people. What frightened them the most was that strange illnesses started appearing in the village, and every time someone died, their body didn't decompose but remained intact, as if it had fallen into a state of hibernation without being noticed. The people who died under mysterious circumstances became ghostly figures, wandering the streets at night. One day, the local blacksmith, Jonathan Larson, when returning home from work, saw something that made his heart freeze. On the ground, right by his door, lay a book, the same one that Ellen had once been known for. It was black, made of leather, and the writing on its pages seemed to change as he looked at it. He picked it up and immediately felt a chill that seeped into his hands. The feeling that this was not just a book, not just an object, but something horrifying, made him throw it into the fire. But the book did not burn. The flames licked its pages, but they remained undamaged. And then Jonathan realized that he could no longer escape the dark force that enveloped the village. He tried to ignite the fire again, but this time something even more terrifying happened. The flames turned a red hue and bubbled as if they defied the natural order. "It's her book," Jonathan said, realizing that this was not just a memory of Ellen, but her legacy that still held Lightwood in its grasp. The forest surrounding Lightwood became an ominous place. People who tried to travel through the woods would disappear without a trace, leaving no evidence, no bodies. Anyone who tried to lift this sinister burden became part of its dark force. It was as if the forest itself was breathing, as if its branches reached out to anyone who tried to leave this place. And so, one night, a group of brave men, including Jonathan Larson, decided to venture into the woods to search for Jake Fields, the son of a local farmer, who had disappeared without a trace several days earlier. They ventured deep into the forest, and their path grew darker. Fog filled the space, and they lost their bearings, losing track of time. Each step felt like an inevitable move toward what lived in the depths of the forest. They heard the first scream. It was Jake Fields' voice, but it didn't sound human. It was as if the forest itself had claimed his soul. Far away, through the thick fog, they saw his figure standing by an old tree, covered in black moss and distorted with strange markings. Jake stood in complete silence, but his eyes were empty, and his body appeared so altered that it no longer resembled a human. He's dead," Jonathan said in horror. And then, suddenly, the earth beneath their feet began to move, and black hands emerged from it, pulling him deeper into the forest. Those who managed to escape never spoke of what they had seen. The forest swallowed their words. Lightwood became a lost place, where nothing could be free from the shadow of Ellen Morgan. People began to notice that with each passing year, their lives grew harder. The land was only fertile for a short time, and after each harvest, it brought more sickness. Bodies started appearing on the banks of the river, scorched as if by shells, with strange scars that could not be explained. And so, in the 7th year after Ellen's death, the people gathered for a secret meeting, deciding to put an end to it once and for all. They summoned an old warlock, who, as they had heard, held the power of ancient rituals. That night was the most terrifying of their lives. They lit a fire and dug a pit, preparing to perform an ancient purification. They understood that their faith in God would no longer provide them with answers. In the hearts of each of them, there was only one thought: if they did not stop this curse, it would consume the entire land. They threw books, ritual objects, and even pieces of earth from Ellen's grave into the flames. But even when the fire consumed everything around them, she returned. And with her shadow came all those who had died before her. Since that time, Lightwood no longer existed on the map. Only the wild forest remained in its place, and the dark land, which held the echoes of all those who had ever crossed the threshold of this cursed place. Now, if you walk through the forest on a dark night, you can hear whispers coming from a tree covered in black moss. Sometimes, you can see shadows wandering along the same paths where the living once walked. And no one dares to stay there overnight. The town of Lightwood became part of local legends, scaring those who seek adventure in the territory of forgotten lands. And if you listen to the misty wind, sometimes it will carry with it the voices from the past. She's still here. Time, as always, consumed the traces, but the stories did not disappear. Lightwood had become a place that repelled even the bravest. Those who dared to approach the abandoned village reported strange occurrences. Flashes of red lights appeared in the sky at night, and the sound of something resembling a scream mixed with whispers echoed from the forest. But with each passing year, the fear of Lightwood began to fade. People forgot. Only a few elderly residents, who had survived those times, still remembered what had truly happened. They lived apart, but their gazes often grew heavy, their eyes fixated on one spot. They knew that the dark force had not vanished. It was only waiting. And so, many years after the last purification, a dark shadow once again appeared on the horizon. It was not just a person. It was a being, draped in black cloth, walking upon the earth, leaving behind traces that burned directly into the ground. It moved towards Lightwood like never before. Everyone who saw it began to feel their hearts tighten with invisible terror. This was not an ordinary person, and it was here with one purpose: to restore what had once been destroyed. It had come not just to renew the curse, but also to find and use the last remnants of Ellen Morgan's power. The people in the village realized that this was not just an ancient ghost, but a native dark being from the same world that had once spawned the witch. What had happened to those who fell under Ellen's influence, those who died in the forest or became victims of the burning fires? Over time, their souls had become part of that dark fire that never ceased to blaze. They had transformed into immortal demons, existing beyond the physical world, forever wandering the dark forests of Lightwood. Several generations after the fall of the village began to return to these forgotten lands. They had heard tales of how, against the backdrop of the old trees, one could see flickering figures moving in the wind, and how sounds resembling human voices emanated from the forest, but they were no longer the voices of the living. Those who dared to stay overnight could feel the ground beneath their feet heating up, as if the fire had not been extinguished. Sometimes they heard footsteps behind them, and when they turned, they found empty spaces where nothing existed. But within their souls, an indescribable anxiety grew, for they knew that every move they made was being watched by the same forces that had cursed this place. Time did not stand still, and Lightwood remained a place that had not forgotten its dark legacy. However, the locals began to return, searching for new ways to expel this sinister force. Unlike the old days, there was now another weapon: belief in science, new methods, and mechanisms. But all of this was in vain, as the dark force could never be destroyed so easily. Saviors who arrived from various towns encountered unexplainable phenomena. They saw things that could not be described in words: leaves burning in the air without leaving a trace, walls cracking by themselves when living creatures passed nearby, and the trees themselves, which seemed to absorb the sun, casting shadows that were, in fact, dark, blackening forces. None of them returned. Lightwood remained a place where invisible death reigned eternally. And if you pass by these places, you will hear how the darkness whispers in your ear: "You have not escaped yet. You are not free." The stories circulating about Lightwood began to become part of a larger mythology. However, some of them remained more than just words. People who later settled in the surrounding areas began to disappear, just like those who laughed at these tales. And so, on one such site, where the Dennison family had recently lived, only empty houses were found. They were clean, but the shadows from within never disappeared. Just a few years ago, One of the brave travelers who decided to penetrate the heart of Lightwood left the final entries in his book, which became known as Notes on the Eternal Shadows. These entries became rare evidence that Lightwood might exist outside of time. The legend says that the souls of the dead witches, demons, and cursed beings who lived on these lands can never leave. They are part of this place, forever searching for new souls to keep them in eternal captivity. In Lightwood, there was more than just a curse. The forest itself had become part of this dark world. The top of every tree, every branch, seemed to hear what was happening around it. Every breath of wind in the forest carried an invisible threat that could not be understood. All who entered felt their steps grow heavier, their bodies gradually enveloped by the weight of fear. One of the last travelers who tried to leave the forest wrote in his diary, "The forest, it seems to come alive. The black trees haunt me, or maybe my eyes are failing me. They move, they watch me, they laugh. With every step, I hear the ground beneath my feet filled with dull screams. My feet sink into the earth, pulling me deeper. If I could turn back, I would do it now. But I feel it's already impossible." And when he didn't return home, another person set out in search of him. Eventually, these searches grew into a more terrifying story, where each new death only added strength to this place. And when they found his remains, they no longer belonged to him. The body looked as though it hadn't just been killed, but completely consumed by the roots. The roots that rose from the earth seemed to absorb life and souls, and what we once thought of as living beings had actually become part of these terrifying forest creatures. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Lightwood curse was its fire. Not just any fire, but a fire that could not burn out. A fire that consumed not only matter, but souls. And if you got too close, you could feel your own body beginning to burn from the inside, even if the flames never touched you. Stories about this fire were told by the old locals. They spoke of a fire that constantly burned in the forest, regardless of the seasons. A fire that gave no rest to the living or the dead. And only those who tried to approach it ended up trapped in a snare that had no exit. One day, a young man, who didn't believe in the legends, decided to go into the forest and check out these stories. He was quite desperate and thought all these talks were just lies. Walking through the forest, he suddenly saw bright flashes of fire among the trees. He approached, watching as the flames rose, leaving no trace on the ground. "This can't be real fire," he thought as he got closer. But as soon as he crossed the boundary where the fire blazed, the flames suddenly engulfed him, not touching his skin, but causing excruciating pain inside him. He tried to break free, but the more he struggled, the more he felt his last strength drain away. And then, darkness. He became part of the fire. He burned. And from that moment on, every time the fire flared, his face could be seen in the dark tongues of flame dancing among the trees. There was one thing that only those who tried to escape from Lightwood understood. It wasn't just a place. It was a portal that connected the worlds of the living and the dead. And those who died here never remained mere spirits. They became something else. Sometimes, when you listen to the wind whistling through the branches, you hear voices. They aren't the voices of the dead people. They are voices that constantly change, like a powerful, ominous shadow shifting from one form to another. They try to convey something important, but it's impossible to tell if it's the truth or just mockery from the shadows. Those who stayed in this place too long began to feel it, the gradual influence on their mind, where the line between reality and nightmares grew increasingly blurred. At times, it became hard to tell whether the world around them was the real world or if they had already become part of the dark force of the forest, which consumed all living things. One day, one of those who had witnessed such changes woke up at dawn and saw himself in the reflection on the surface of a nearby lake. In his eyes, there was a terrible emptiness. He no longer saw himself as alive, just an empty shell, walking among the dead. Lightwood remained a place where reality was so twisted that it was impossible to understand where evil began and where it ended. And everyone who took the final step on this path became part of this endless game. The forest became so powerful that even the earth itself began to change. The black trees stretched higher, their roots absorbed the land, they consumed everything around them, and even reality itself began to bend around Lightwood. And if you enter this forest again, you won't be able to leave. You will find yourself among those same shadows walking on the ground, and over time, your faces will disappear, and your name will become just another forgotten legend for future generations. No one ever left Lightwood alive. and those who tried no longer existed. Their souls became part of this eternal nightmare. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows, they are always near. Until next time.